Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in today to talk about Oshi no Ko, chapter number 141. This chapter is titled Chain. And, well, I sort of have taken what's honestly my frequent breaks off of Oshi no Ko, as sometimes I just don't have time to film YouTube videos and talk about things I enjoy talking about. But we are finally back this week with chapter number 141 of Oshi no Ko. And as with the past, I don't know, at least 3 Oshi no Ko chapters, I need to just put out there before I do anything else, just a general content warning. If you don't know what actually's happened in these Oshi no Ko chapters and are just following around along just to hear me talk about it, or if you haven't read these chapters yet, just a general content warning that yes, this chapter does get into a lot more of the messed up side of the entertainment industry. And with that, all the stuff with Ari and Hikaru that's been happening these past few weeks. So I'm just putting that out there for anybody who gets very uncomfortable very easy around that sort of idea. And yeah, with that out there, yeah, this chapter's very messed up. I mean, we of course start off this chapter with a bit of a not really a flashback but to many of these scenes being filmed in the 15-year live movie, and then cut to a bunch of our main characters' commentary on these ideas, right? Of course, last chapter we had the whole thing, it was entirely set inside the 15-year lie last chapter, showing just the filming process, and the chapter was really about how the movie is portraying Ai and Hikaru's relationship, as we sort of see them go through life, getting closer to each other, and all of that sort of general idea. And there was, at the very end, the general idea of, oh, hey, the Dark Starengons may actually mean a person who is lying to themselves in some sort of capacity. So that was a sort of very interesting little idea that we got there at the end of last chapter, but it doesn't really get brought up that much in this chapter right here, right? But I'd say let's just go and hop into it. Again, this is chapter number 141, titled Chain. So as we open up this chapter, we get something that we get very less frequently in manga, and that is gray panels, right? It's always fun whenever we get gray panels, because a lot of people are always like, oh, what are gray panels? What do they actually mean? And the way it's like, alright, yes, white panels are things that are happening in the moment, right? And whenever the entire thing is black, that means it is a flashback time, right? Of course, I love whenever you have physical manga volumes and you can always tell where massive flashbacks happen because just everything is coated in that black film, but it's just funny. And of course, gray panels are always sort of like flashbacks inside of flashbacks, or just like a local perspective inside a flashback that isn't meant to be the current timeline. I don't know. But we start off with gray panels nonetheless, right? As we see that we are opening up this chapter with scene number 8. And it is Ari Himekawa's verbal attack, right? As we pretty much get a little bit of narration just saying that after talking to Kamaki, I went to see Ari Himekawa. As we see I eventually walk up to Ari, and Ari just sort of looks around and looks very much down on I, as she sort of just goes through and says like, hey, so what? This is free love, mind your own business, right? And she's just like, hey, Hikaru came to me of his own free will. He thinks he can then go and act on his own. Am I wrong with this, right? And I sort of retorts back to Ari here, just saying like, hey, Hikaru said he's doing it because it is the right thing to do. Hikaru is still a child, you know. He's at the age where he's trying to figure out what is right and what is wrong. But you, Ari, have forced him to take responsibility. Shouldn't the adults be the ones empathizing with children for their ignorance? And she just continues saying like, hey, if adults don't protect children, then what can anyone do about it, right? As we see that in this moment, Ai's Sharingan sort of turn up into that very like a light Sharingan, like they are pure brilliant white just staring at Ari, and she just says like, hey, you are nothing but a sex offender, sort of just saying this straight to Ari's face, right? And at this point, as the scene name initially foreshadowed, I guess, Ari starts a verbal attack at this point, right? As, of course, Ai has just made this point to Ari, and Ari just retorts, just saying, like, hey, What the hell? Why should I be the only one to blame? I've lived my life experiencing the same things, you know. I take everything good or filthy in this entertainment world. They keep telling me that it's the right thing to do. I believe them and I made it this far. Why should I be the only one exploited by men? She's like, I really love Hikaru, and I've been very kind to him. His experience is 100 times better than mine. As at this point, we cut out from the scene to the presence of our main characters, right? But the whole point of this is just showing that line of corruption that has gone down. So it is seemed that somebody has done this to Ari in the past, and her growing up in the entertainment world, or maybe not even her growing up in the entertainment world, just her living in the entertainment world, eventually moving to where this is a situation that she has passed on to Hikaru by doing it to him, and of course we know that Hikaru has passed this on to many other people, being the not sort of so stand-up guy Hikaru is in a present timeline. So that is really the main point of this first part. But at this point, we get into Wordy no Ko, as this chapter really just starts to grow and get more wordy, right? As all of a sudden, we cut over to a room inside the production studio where they are filming the movie, where we see that Akane and Mimcho are sitting talking about this scene right here, right? And Mimcho just says, like, hey, is this what they call a negative chain reaction? Obviously reading the script at this moment, right? But Akane just says, like, hey, making a move on children is very much out of the question, and it's something that should never happen, right? And as Akane says this, Miyako sort of appears out of thin air and starts to talk with these two a bit more, right? As Miyako just says, like, hey, there are many cases where victims turn into offenders themselves due to sex problems, right? Many people think that if your dignity is taken away through sex, the only way you can get it back is again then through sex. Of course, we know this is something that has happened with Hikaru, actually, and we just saw it happen with Ari, right? So, sort of showing us a prelude to, alright, this is this idea, and here we are talking about it, right? But Miyako just continues to say, like, hey, in the end, this industry is inseparable from that kind of thing. In the second half of the Showa, and of course the Showa is the era of Japanese history that runs from about the mid-20s to the beginning of the 90s, somewhere around there. But she says, like, hey, in the second half of the Showa, so that'd be approximately what? If that's 25 about to 90, that is a range of just under 65 years. So pretty much saying from about the 60s to the 90s, the entertainment industry and the crime syndicates were deeply connected, right? Oh boy. Pretty much saying that there was a time when famous actresses became the mistresses of gang leaders. And it was the same 20 years ago when Ari Himakawa was still active as an actor. As we sort of see a brief image of a younger Ari being a mistress of a prominent gang boss in a way. So it is something that happened to her and thus something that she passed on, right? Miyako continues just saying, like, hey, there were many agencies that invited young celebrities, clueless celebrities, whether they were minors or not, to drink with important people and encouraged them to use women for business. And Miyako's like, hey, I just heard it was really messed up back then. And she's like, hey, but now we live in a better era in a way with fewer agencies like that, to where it is not as common, which is definitely a very good thing, right? At this point, Akane sort of pipes up, and she just says, like, hey, it is very nice and all that to do now that all we have to do is rush over and play hostess with old men, which I get the point that she's trying to get across, just saying, like, hey, even when the producer calls at night, it's never too late, sort of saying that there isn't really an improvement, as Miyako is saying here. But Miyako then just says, like, hey, in the end, the people who lived in that era are doing the exact same to the next generation. Even now, influential men still take young women, gather around. The only difference is that the individuals are now doing what those agencies used to do. it just makes perfect sense the way they're explaining it. I just really don't have too much to say on any of this. As she eventually just says, like, hey, these older men will see young women who don't know any better, and next to influential old men telling them that it is the right thing to do, or that their success depends on their various efforts. And Miyako just says, like, hey, when I was so active, I was also invited to many drinking parties, and I was clueless about almost every night. And they just come back to me because there were some powerful figures there, right? And she says, like, hey, in reality, all they did was mix night workers and celebrities together to where you couldn't even tell them apart. It is a place where sexual harassment and physical contact were the norm. And we saw this a lot in Miyako's flashback. What was it? Chapter 126, I think. We saw a good amount of this as she was like, hey, I'd go to all of these young bars and stuff and not really get the point. So, but yeah, we've seen this before with her specifically. And we eventually see that Miyako just says, like, hey, there were even times when I felt like they were going to kiss me out of the blue, as we sort of see an image of her trying to push one of these people away. So we're just showing that, yes, the entertainment industry is very greasy and disgusting at times, right? Miyako just continues saying that many of the girls in these situations are often worried that if they refuse these offers by the older men, a lot of their jobs will get cut short, while others are trying to hold back and fulfill the man's lust as much as they can because that's sort of what they want to do. And the more earnest a girl is, the more of advantage she is taken of, right? She just says, like, hey, treating young women like hostesses and forcing them to pour drinks for their boss isn't uniquely to this industry, though, as it happens many places. They've continued to deprive women of their right to refuse by instilling in them the idea that some things should happen is the right thing to do. The entertainment industry is just more wicked. The entertainment industry is where lookism is at its peak and where sex and beauties are goods for sale. Where even this ability to say no is taken away, and the idea of being forced to have sex is right. Just how far can a person actually be right? And boy, is this just a loaded statement about just the industry and human nature as a whole. I really don't feel qualified to sit down and break a lot of this down in more of a way than just talking about these brief ideas, but yeah, it is a serious problem, and I think Miyako's speech here does a very good job of outlining the problems that all of these industries can have and how they combined can force people who are naive and not knowing of the world and how bad they can truly be taken advantage of. And I'd be very remorse if I didn't bring up this final page here on, what is it? If I could look. Oh, of course, come on. I don't know what page it's on, but just this brief image of just Miyako, Mimcho, and Akane just sitting down, and just the white background behind him as Miyako says this final line of just how far can a person be right. It is a image that really shows just how much these characters are thinking on these topics, right? It just, I just truly understand the emotion, and the way that Akasaka and Mingo Yoriki portrayed it here is just excellent. It really gets the point across, I feel. But at this point, after this happens, we finally see that somebody has been standing behind Mimcho this entire time. And it is none other of a person than Taiki Himakawa, right? As Himakawa just says, like, or as Taiki just says, like, hey, people still have to be right, or else they're done for. As he says, like, hey, I've lost both my mother and my father because of that same idea. And at this point, Akane just sort of, like, pipes up a little bit, going over to Taiki and just says, like, hey, but Taiki, being what you just said, you still like frequenting bars and nightclubs, right? And at this point, Mimcho sort of just pipes up like, hey, don't say that. But Taiki just sort of pipes up in more of a comedic nature at this point, just saying like, hey, modern peoples have holes in their hearts that can only be filled with booze, you know? And he's like, and they're nice when they just want girls to smile at them. Like, we just need to patch up our hearts sometimes, right? As we finally see that Aqua is also entering the room. And Taiki's like, hey, isn't that right, Aqua? But Aqua is very much just like, hey, please don't bring me into this, right? Like, I don't want any part of this whatsoever. And Taiki sort of just goes on more of a rant, just saying like, hey, do you understand how men feel, having been taught from young age that we're scum and losers? That's why I go, like, to such these places, to be someone who protects all the girls there, right? Like, Taiki really showing his white knight energy there, as he just continues like saying like, hey, and if anything, I'm a drinking party cop who maintains order at drinking parties, right? And it kind of just sort of takes a note of just like, hey, I bet you just want all of that, so girls think well of you, right? But Taiki just says like, hey, well, in this day and age, you can't protect yourself by not going to drinking parties if you're invited by suspicious people. And I haven't heard much about that where I've worked over the last decade, so I think things are getting a lot better. But still, there is a deep darkness within this world. And he says like, hey, just don't forget that at all. And that is sort of where we cut off the scene, as we see images of Akane and Mimcho sort of like stealing themselves in a way. It's an interesting little panel, right? But at this point, we cut over to the last part of the chapter, where we see that Kana and Ruby are sitting in a waiting room, sort of talking and sort of just sitting around, as all of a sudden, Frill walks in the room, right? And what would Frill be wearing but just a towel over her back and nothing else? And both of Ruby and Kana are just like, hey, what are you doing? Well, you scared us. I thought a slut had entered our room, which is, okay, that's wording, but we pretty much see the Frill's just like, oh, hey, good job, girls. And it's just a joke that she's not wearing anything. It's just stupid. Like, the whole point of this chapter was how a lot of people take advantage of women, and sort of just then going back and showing this sort of fan service sort of seems like the same exact thing. So I sort of feel like the message falls flat a little there, but sure, whatever. Kana then pipes up saying to Frill like, hey, you're very, very comfortable with sex scenes, huh, then aren't you, right? And Frill's just like, well, I wanted to honor reality, right? And Kana's like, so are you really okay with showing that much skin then? And Frill's just like, yep, I'll strip down if I must. And she's like, I wanted to put more effort into acting in the future, and I was thinking of doing it when I grew up anyway, right? And she's like, hey, it's important to emphasize that you can do anything for the sake of acting, right? And Ruby's like, oh my gosh, you're really giving this your all, huh? And Frill's just like, oh, hey, Ruby, are you alright with everything? And she says, hey, it's almost time for your kissing scene with Aqua. And she just says, oh man, you and Aqua, Ruby, you two are siblings. But you're willing to go that far? I'm really amazed. And we end off the chapter with Frill saying this finally in a bathrobe, thank you. Kana looking very disgusted, and Ruby looking a lot more happy than she has any right to be. And that is where we end off this chapter of Oshinoko. Yeah, content warning. Yeah, do I have anything to say at this point? Yes, okay. Ruby and Aqua are going to be having a kissing scene, of course, between Ai and Hikaru. Makes perfect sense. And why is Ruby not hiring, like, a body double or something? I don't know, but she's doing it because she's weird like that. And, oh man, it's the Doctor and Serena. Oh boy. And then just the whole joke with Frill being not wearing anything is really stupid. And the whole beginning of the chapter, I like the message that Miyako is trying to build up of the darkness inside of the acting industry. And of course we know the darkness within Hikaru, as I'm pretty sure that's where most of this will be leading to, but it's hard to say I enjoyed this chapter. It is very deep and uncomfortable, and I not want to say that I enjoy, but I understand why the chapter needed to be this way. And it makes perfect sense, and just reading it gives a lot better insight on these characters, and also just the truths of the real world. But at the same time, the back half of the chapter is just stupid and not fun to read at all. So, yeah. The chapter title is Chain again, and I get the whole point is like, these actresses are chained down by these older people and forced to do these things that they may have not wanted to do. And I think that's a fine idea, and I think the beginning of this half of this chapter is very fine, but ending it off with, oh, hey, Ruby, wanna kiss Aqua, is just stupid, and I really feel like I'm being a massive downer on this chapter, but at a point, what good am I supposed to say if there's nothing good happening here at all? And with that, I really don't have too much else to say about this chapter. Of course, I gave my thoughts on it, and hey, I'll be back soon with chapter number 142 of Oshi no Ko. Hopefully it's a lot better than 141 here, but yeah. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you were also deeply uncomfortable with at least the last half of this chapter, leave it down in the comments section down below. And also, well, if you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel, it's a little thing you can do to really help me out. Also, drop a like on the video. Both those two things just really help me out in the long run. And yeah, I really don't have too much else to say. I'll see you guys next time with chapter number 142. This was chapter number 141 of Oshi no Ko, again, titled Chains. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. This is Glowplasma231, signing out.